Hi, my name is Ebonie, and welcome to You Have a Story with ToTsFrishion, where we share incredible, encouraging, and faith-filled cancer stories. And before you dive into this episode, I would love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. And once you do, please don't forget to like and share this episode with someone and join the community that uplifts powerful cancer narratives. We continue to share incredible, encouraging, and faith-filled cancer stories here at ToTsFrishion. And always remember, you have a story. Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. And as you know, this is Iyanu Adigbite, your very host at You Have a Story with ToTsFrishion, where we share incredible, amazing, encouraging, and faith-filled cancer stories. And today I have an incredible guest. You know everyone is incredible at ToTsFrishion. So I have Ebonie Michelle, and she has an amazing story. Today I was just reading off on her background and you will be inspired. So please, as you listen, be open hearted, listen closely, and one or two nuggets that you can pick from this. Just take it in and be inspired. So, Heavenly, welcome and thank you for honoring my invitation.
Honored to be here. I'm so honored to be here. I think that what you are doing and the platform that you have is so critical to the voices that need to be heard. And like you say, regardless of the story, if you can take one or two nuggets that help you to move along in your path, then the job of this podcast has been done, which clearly it has. So I am very honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So, before we dive in, can you
Sure.
just tell us a little bit about yourself? Just give us a glimpse of who Ebony Michelle is.
I am a wife. I'm a mom. I'm a mentor. I'm a friend. I'm an entrepreneur. And I just happen to have had, you know, various health challenges, like you were saying, since I was young. And all of my experiences really coalesced into this company that I have founded called Proud the Lab, which is, with the exception of my children, of course, one of my greatest achievements and something that I am extremely proud of. I currently reside in Chicago, where, depending upon the day, I'm freezing to death right now, but it's all right. It's okay. I'm going to roll with it. And, I am an advocate for so many different communities simply because of the different experiences that I have had with different conditions, again, that all led me to this point. So I am just a woman that wakes up every day putting one foot in front of the other, trying to be a better person than I was the day before.
Amazing, amazing. You have a lot in your courts, I should say.
Thank
But
you so much. It's a lot, but I love it. I love it.
thank you for giving us a little glimpse about yourself. So
Absolutely.
while I was reading your because usually when you schedule to share your story, we have just a little section to just give us a little briefly describe your story. So
Hmm.
you said at age 9 you started puberty. That's really
I
young.
did.
I remember.
Very.
Well, like you started your menstrual cycle at age 9.
Age 9.
Yes.
Yes.
I remember
And
9.
that was wild. Yes. I
Yes.
remember the day it happened. I went to Catholic school. I was in Catholic school. And, I was just, my stomach had just been hurting so bad, but it was the worst stomach ache I'd ever had. And somehow my sister ended up in the hallway the same time that I did. She's 18 months older than me. And so she went to the bathroom with me. And once we realized what was going on, I remember she's running down the hallway to the office before I could even get there. My sister's cycle came on. I had no idea what was going on. So, I can look back now with humor, but I think that there was a part of me that was really happy that she was there.
Mhm.
because it had happened to her not too long before it happened to me. So she was able to kind of be that calm
Yeah.
that I needed. My mother never really got the chance to give me the same conversation that she gave my sister
Oh.
because I was so young. No one expected it. And I didn't actually find out until I was an adult that my mother's actually came on early as well.
Mm,
So I do think that there's some genetic component to, why it happens. But my daughter's 8 now, so I'm just hoping that she has a couple more years until she has to deal with it.
I remember mine too. I came out at an early age. I believe I was 12 or so.
Mm, yes. And that's the thing is like you think about it and you're like, yeah, 12 is really early. But then you hear there's some women it happens at like 8 and 9. And, for me, it begins conversations that you may not be ready to have. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I
Yeah.
had conversations with my parents that I really was not able to put into the proper context until I was older. And I think that's one of the reasons why I hope that my daughter has a little bit more time left because I
Mm-hmm.
want her to have the knowledge and the maturity level to be able to put some of those conversations about what this means into the proper context.
Yeah. Absolutely. And based on your write up, so you had your menstrual cycle at 9, and then
Hmm.
at 13, you were diagnosed with adenomyosis
Adenomyosis,
and
yes.
then
So
endometriosis, right?
yes, so it was a battle. At 13, I just used to have all of this pain and I would have a lot of bleeding and I really didn't understand what was going on. And I remember my mother finally took me to the doctor because she realized it wasn't really normal. And when you're diagnosed with something like adenomyosis, and I also started having ovarian cysts, I want to say maybe between 14 and 16.
Mm-hmm.
So you're again having another conversation because they put you on birth control pills when you're very young to kind of help treat the cysts without having to have surgery. So, of course, your parents are like, well, what does this mean? My child is on birth control pills. You know what birth control pills are for. So now we have to have a whole nother conversation, that you're probably not ready for, but you have to have it anyway. So I had these conversations with my parents, and it was really around the time when puberty should have been happening. And at that time, my mother had been moved to Baltimore, Maryland for her job, and my father was still in Atlanta. So my sister and I spent a lot of time alone. My mother was trying to raise both of us at a very difficult point in our lives. So there was just a lot that I didn't really connect about
Mm-hmm.
my sexuality, about my womanhood, about what this all meant. And, I look back now and I see that everything really would happen the way that it was supposed to happen. But it was a very confusing time. And so I did end up moving, but we did end up moving back to Atlanta because my parents never separated. They were never divorced or anything like that. We simply moved because my mother's job needed her to fulfill some obligations for her company in Maryland. But my parents loved each other so much until my mother passed away. And just the thought of continuing to be apart from one another was very challenging for them. And my father did not like to be away from his children. Very rarely do you hear those stories about fathers that really, experience pain and angst being away from their children, in that capacity. The good thing was he worked for the airlines. Back in the day, when I was young, there was Northwest Airlines that's now Delta. So he could fly up every month and, see our family sometimes twice a month. But that was still really hard for him. And when I really started having some health challenges is when we moved back to Atlanta. And that's when we realized that I was having repeated cysts and just repeated pain. There were days that I would have to miss school because I was bleeding so much. And I was at a point where at the age of 16, I was wearing like super pads and I would have to double them up. So that's how bad it got. And so they put me on continuous birth control pills so that I would not have a cycle. And what ended up happening was when I was 19, I began to get a different type of pain. And it just so happened that I started seeing a doctor that had attended a conference where they had a seminar on endometriosis.
Okay.
And because of that, he was able to recognize that that was what I was experiencing, that my condition, if you will, or my health, the conditions of my reproductive system had gone beyond adenomyosis into endometriosis. I actually had lesions on areas of my bowels. I had areas on my ovaries, and there were a couple of other areas that they had to remove when I was 19. And that became the first of 8 different laparoscopic surgeries or laparoscopic procedures, as they call, that I had to
Mhm.
have. So, having 8 different surgeries for endometriosis, being told I would probably never have children,
Hmm.
being told that this is something that you can't cure
Hmm.
was very challenging to me. I do remember, when I was growing up, I was like, oh, I don't want children. But when someone tells you that you can't have children and you really think about it when you're older, you're like, okay, is this something that I can live with? And it was hard for me to grasp that. It really was challenging for me. And I had started dating my boyfriend, who's my husband now, when I was about 19. And I remember that there were so many things I hid from him because, I was ashamed. First of all, you don't talk about your menstrual cycle with me in any way. That was just a no no. Even if it's someone that at that particular point in time you're intimate with, you just don't share those things with them.
Yeah.
So there were so many times that I had to hide things from him until it got to the point that I literally could not hide things from him. And it I always say that my sexuality really has always been viewed through the lens of disease status.
Hmm.
As I was growing and becoming a woman from a child, from babyhood in a sense, I think of being 8 and 9 is really being a baby, but of course, that's girlhood. But from girlhood into womanhood, every step of my development in terms of my sexuality has been defined in some capacity by disease. And I did not, after all the surgeries that I had, my husband and I had decided, if we can't have children, we'll adopt. And we said, but, let's see what the medical world can do. And I was seeing an endocrinologist, and he said, come in, let's do a dye test, which is when they put dye into your ovaries and see if they come out the fallopian tubes to make sure that your fallopian tubes and everything's clear. And, for some reason, I was having a lot of pain. They said, you need to go to your doctor first before we do this. And it ended up happening that I was pregnant.
Oh.
I know my baby. That's my little miracle baby. So, I was 7 weeks pregnant when I
Wow.
finally went to the doctor. And it was the most amazing surprise as you can possibly imagine. And I look at him now, he's 13.
Oh my
And,
God.
I know, right? That just, it
Oh.
just, that just did something to me. That did something to me. And I look at him now and I'm like, you are still my miracle. He's still my miracle. It was such a blessing. And I had complications with him. My pregnancy went well, but it was during the end of my pregnancy that I had developed preeclampsia.
Mhm.
And, preeclampsia can be very dangerous,
Yeah.
especially for Black women, who, for many different reasons that, we don't have to talk about now, but a lot of it has to do with just the unconscious bias against Black women in the medical system. We die at a greater rate than our white counterparts.
Mhm.
And I am lucky that the team that I had was like, we're not letting you out of the hospital. We're going to watch you, day in, day out. And I was in the hospital for a month before my son was born. And one day my doctor just comes into my room and he said, we checked your protein, so your son is coming today.
Oh.
And my son, my husband, I called my husband and I told him, and my husband came in the room and he looked at me and he just started laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? He's like, you look like you are in no way prepared for this. I was so terrified because, as they say, no one really prepares you for parenthood. And, it was snowing outside. And I think that's really the last year that I remember it being a really, really heavy snow. And so we were, in a way, kind of locked into the hospital. I couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't trying to go anywhere anyway, but I went into labor with my son. I did like 20 something hours and I had an epidural, but I got an epidural because I had a headache. Didn't have anything to do with, me having, pains in my stomach or anything like that. And I remember them saying, you'll know when he's coming because it'll feel like a bowling ball coming down the chute. And I'm like, that's the craziest thing to tell somebody. But that is exactly what it felt like. So I knew he was coming. And I told my husband, I said, baby, I think the baby's coming. And he said, man, turn over. You don't know what you're talking about. My son was here 30 minutes later.
Wow.
I literally pushed twice and he was out and he was screaming. And it was hands down the most beautiful sight and the most beautiful sound that I could ever remember hearing. And it made everything that I had gone through worth it. I still look at his little almond shaped eyes and he was so worth it, you know? And he was my pride and my joy and still is. And then he was about 3 months old, I began to get these really bad pains in my chest. And I couldn't understand why. I went to the doctor, went to the hospital, went to the emergency room where the nurses were literally fighting over who got to hold the baby, which was hilarious. So he's maybe 3.5 months old. And I went, they did every workup they needed to do, did a CAT scan and everything. And they said, there's nothing wrong with you. The doctor actually told me to my face that he thought that I was lying and only came into the hospital for pain medication.
Wow.
Oh, yes. And I remember that I was so upset and I was so worried because I still felt this pain. And then the next day, I kept getting this number from a 5-digit number. And, in the States, there's no such thing as a 5-digit number. So I was not answering the phone. And someone, something told me just answer the phone. And I did. Come to find out it was the hospital. And they had misread my CT scan. And I had a clot in my lung. So I immediately had to go back to the hospital because I had a blood clot in my lung and they had to treat me for the blood clot. But as I was there, they also noticed that some of my other vitals were not in sync. My blood levels, there was something going really wrong, and I just began to get very sick. And they admitted me to the hospital. And there's this little lady. She's she has to be like 5 feet, maybe with heels. And she comes into my room, and she's a doctor who's doing the rounds, and she sees how sick I am, and they're worried about having to do a blood transfusion and a couple of other things. And they were like, "Did anybody check her for lupus?" And lo and behold, that's when I was diagnosed with lupus.
Mm.
So my son, who's 3.5 months, I had to stop breastfeeding him. I had to be on heavy pain medication because my lupus attacks my joints and it attacks my muscles. So I would have a lot of pain walking. My hands would swell. And I noticed it, but it didn't. I just thought that it was complications from, having a child.
Yeah.
And that was my first introduction to a life with chronic illness.
Mm.
So just to speed up a little bit, after that, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Then I was diagnosed with Sjogren's disease, both of which are autoimmune and chronic conditions. And in my early 40s, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so not only was I diagnosed with breast cancer, I was diagnosed with bilateral breast cancer, which means that I had breast cancer in both breasts. And one was more aggressive than the other. I had gone to one of, Chicago, or actually the state of Illinois in the country, one of the best hospitals in the country, and they actually missed it. And I went to another one to get a second opinion. My mother used to always tell me, you always get a second opinion, especially when it's something serious. And so I'm so glad that I listened to her. But, I must say that it was also how I was treated at the first hospital. They didn't want to give me information about my test results because they said it was too technical. So they believed that I wouldn't understand and did not give me the information until I told them, I'm like, look, I have a master's degree in public health. How about you try me? And everything they told me, I was able to give them a clinical definition of what it was. And they looked like they were so surprised, like I couldn't be intelligent enough, to understand what was going on with my own body. And so it really was being treated in that manner that made me so determined to go and get a second opinion. And I'm glad I did because I know that it saved my life. Because the second lesion that they found was actually bigger than the first and it was more aggressive. And so, had that not happened, there's no telling where I would have been.
Yeah.
There's no telling what would have happened. And that is something that I carry with me in the work that I do when I speak to the women in my community, about testing, and when I speak to them about making sure that you advocate for yourself. I often think about those things because my story could have been very different. My story could be over now.
Mm.
I am now in my last year of treatment, thank goodness. And, I think about the fact my mother never made it 5 years. So with me coming on up in 5 years, I do celebrate her and I think about what the possibilities could have been. But I also make sure that I celebrate myself
Mm.
and the determination that I had to really advocate for myself. And, some people would probably find that out and go on about their business. But I went back to the hospital that missed my breast cancer and had a conversation with
Mm.
the director of patient relations, the director of the Women's Breast Cancer Center, the director of DEI at that particular point in time. And we had a very frank discussion about my experience and what that could have meant for me and what that could have meant for my family. And I think that that's one of the really impactful experiences that guided me to creating Proud the Lab, among others.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's like you
It's a lot,
condensed.
but it all got me all here. You
Yeah.
know, I don't think that I tell people all the time often that I don't think that I would have been able to understand the human condition. I
Mm.
don't think that I would have been able to understand many of the challenges that so many of my sisters have gone through and continue to go through if I had not had that experience. It would have
Yeah.
been a very challenging road for me to walk. But, you know, it still is. Yesterday I was having a conversation where I actually have also had a partial hysterectomy because of some of the scar tissue that was left over from a lot of the health challenges that I had.
Mm.
And when I had my hysterectomy, I almost died because I had internal bleeding and no one knew.
Mm.
And I hadn't thought about that in years. And I thought about, I talked about how traumatic that was. Even the memory of it is traumatic, which is why I don't really speak about it that often. To be in a situation where you feel yourself dying,
Mm.
is really hard. So I realized that I have to focus on living, you know, focus on living. And yes, the almost dying was hard, but it made me so much more grateful, specifically for my children, specifically for the life and the family that we've been able to build, because I realized that this conversation and that experience could have been very different.
Yeah. How did you manage the disparities that happened during your diagnosis, like when you were going through the journey? How did you manage the disparities?
Not very well. Or being honest with you. When I first felt what was going on, and let me just be completely honest, my husband and I were doing what grown folks do. And there was this voice that was like, why am I hearing this voice at this particular point in time? I'm busy right now. But there's this voice that said, Ebonie, check your breast.
Mm.
And I literally put my hand on it. It took maybe 10 seconds to find it, and I knew what it was. So when I went through the initial diagnosis for breast cancer, I knew, but I wanted them to tell me something different.
Mm.
I was hoping and praying, even knowing that this hope and that this prayer was for naught. I still was hoping and praying that they would tell me something different. But I could tell from the fact that it didn't move. I couldn't feel it every time I touched my chest, but it never moved. Like, depending upon where I move, I feel it here, I might feel it there. And because it never moved, even when I did, I knew what it was. And so part of me had tried to prepare myself. There's no preparation for you have cancer. You know, um, I didn't even let them tell me. I said, when you get the results, call and tell my husband. And, I don't know if that was necessarily cowardly, if you will, but there was a part of me that could not hear those words from someone that didn't care about me.
Mm.
I didn't want to hear it from someone who gives this diagnosis over the phone so often that it becomes routine.
Right. Yeah.
So they told my husband, and it was so interesting how he told me. He's like, yeah, so you already know what it is. So, and I think that the way that him handling it in that way was probably better. And, he said, and he told me everything they told him on the phone. And he just held me. I remember it was during the pandemic because I had to deal with everything on my own. My husband couldn't go with me.
Mm.
You had to be in the hospital by yourself. They did let him come to my surgery, and come see me after my surgery. So that they allowed him to be with me, but every doctor's appointment and everything I had to do it by myself.
Wow.
And it was hard. It was hard. You know, I had to face my mortality at the age of 42, 43. My daughter at that time was 3 years old. And I wondered if my daughter would get the opportunity to know me well enough to remember me.
Mm.
You know, the first thing that we often think of, is death
Yeah.
when someone tells you you have cancer, especially knowing that I watched my mom die. You know, my mother whittled away and whittled away and whittled away until she was just almost a shadow of her former self. I remember having these huge chubby cheeks, and they're like, she used to make me think of these cherubs because every time she smiled, her cheeks looked like apples.
Wait, so
And
did your mom have cancer too? Just want to. Okay.
so my mother had stage 2 when she was diagnosed. She had stage 2 breast cancer. She did a lumpectomy, and she also did radiation.
Mm.
I believe she did chemotherapy as well. And actually, when I was diagnosed, I got in touch with her doctor because he happens to be and still is a wonderful man. He is the father of my sister's best friend. So I was able to get in contact with him, and I wanted to know like what my mom's treatment was, what she did, what her experience was. And I'm so blessed that he was able to give me that information because that really did inform some of the choices that I made.
Mm-hmm.
For example, my mother got a lumpectomy. I opted for the double mastectomy. You know, my mother had breast cancer. They thought that everything had been taken care of. She had gotten a clean bill of health. And by the time my mother passed away, my mother had cancer in her lungs, and she also had it in her brain. Now, due to the fact that her records were so old, they couldn't really tell me if it was breast cancer that had metastasized or whether she had lung cancer that had metastasized. But they did know that her breast cancer came back. So I wanted to make sure that I decreased my chances as much as possible. So that's why I opted for the double mastectomy as opposed to the partial mastectomy, or what they call it a partial mastectomy now, but what they would traditionally call the lumpectomy. And in another bit of information, my grandmother also had breast cancer. And she had one of her breasts removed, and she never had a recurrence. So when I first spoke to my doctor, I was like, I'm not doing this again. You know, if I can help it, I'm not doing this again. Just take them both. I'm like, I caught my husband, I fed my kids, I've done everything with these breasts that I can possibly do. I'd be fine. I thought everything would be okay, but I'm gonna be honest with you. The day that I had my mastectomy, and I looked down and realized that I could see my feet because I'd always been top heavy. I was actually an H before. Yes, it was a lot. So I was actually about an H. And when I looked down and realized that I could see my feet, I just began to shake, like just shake. I never thought that it would hit me like that.
Hmm.
And I was in the hospital, and again, it was around the time of the pandemic. So I remember the nurse saying, she's like, I'm not supposed to do this. And she took her mask off and she took her gloves off, and she just held me. She was the only one. My husband was in the room. It was like 4 nurses in the room. She was the only one that saw how much I was beginning to just break. And she just held me. And interestingly enough, 2 or 3 years later, no, 3.5 years later, when I did the last part of the reconstruction that I had, she ended up being my nurse again. And she remembered me, I remembered her, and I knew that I was in good hands. I
Mm,
knew that I was in good hands, but it was hard for me when I was first diagnosed. It was hard, because I kept thinking about losing my mother, and I had to really come to grips with it. And what I didn't mention was that my mother passed away on Christmas morning. So every Christmas was very hard for me. But when I started having children, and of course, you can't just, flake off on Christmas when you have children, you have to be present. I finally got to the point where I realized that was God's gift to her.
mm,
That was God's gift to say, you don't have to fight. You don't have to go through these treatments anymore. You don't have to be fed through a feeding tube anymore. You don't have to do any of that anymore. You come home and
mm,
I will take care of you. I will sustain you.
mm,
And it took me a long time to get to that point. But once I got to that point, I was able to heal in a different way.
mm,
And I will be honest and say that my experience, not just with all of my chronic conditions that I still carry with me to this day, but my breast cancer diagnosis as well, it transformed me in a way that I don't think it would have, that I would have been had this not happened to me. We all say that, we live for our children, we live for, our families. But the truth is, you have got to learn to live for yourself. And I had to really take a deep dive and realize that I didn't really like myself that
mm,
much a few years ago. As much as people thought that I was confident, as much as people probably thought that I was engaging and I was funny, they didn't realize that that really was my defense mechanism to keep people from knowing me.
mm,
And it was also a defense mechanism that prevented me from realizing that I didn't know myself. So when I was diagnosed with breast cancer and I had to think about my death, and you think about who you are and what is your reason for living? Like, why do I want to be here?
yeah,
What is it that I feel like I can give my children so that they feel the presence of a mother? And I had to learn how to love myself. I never loved myself the way that I should because I didn't know myself.
mm,
And that is one of the greatest gifts that came out of such a harrowing experience is I now know myself. I now love myself. I now respect myself in a different way. And I'm able to set a different example for my daughter.
yeah,
You know, you go through life sometimes and you just put one foot in front of the other. And sometimes you don't think about where you're headed. You just keep going straight.
yeah,
Well, sometimes you have to go backwards.
mm,
Sometimes you have to maneuver to the left or maneuver to the right because getting from A to point B from a straight line is not teaching you what you need to learn. It's not giving you the experiences that are necessary so that you are able to reach back and uplift others that come
yeah,
behind you. And that is my mission. That is my mission. That is what I do, with Proud the Lab. My sexuality, and a lot of people think sexuality is your sexual orientation, and it's not. It's it is the totality of how your womanhood or your manhood has been constructed throughout your life, from gender roles to education, sex education, maternal health information that informs your decisions about motherhood. And, if you have examples of, sexual assault in your past, or if you have, you're in a relationship and you are experiencing or not experiencing the type of intimacy that gives you feelings of love and of joy. And in your life, there's so many things that coalesce together to create our sexuality. And I never really took the steps to understand how mine had been damaged due to my experiences with all of these health conditions that I had. So with Proud of the Lab, it really made me take a step back and say, if this is the platform that I am creating for myself, if this is the platform that I am dedicating to my mom and to my grandmom and all the other women that have gone on, before me, and all the other women who are fighting right now, just like me, and who will come after me, what is the message? What is the example that I want to set?
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I do is in service to my sisters.
Mm.
Everything that I do is in service to making sure that I uplift them, to ensure that they can hopefully avoid some of the experiences that I had that influenced my journey in a way that caused a lot of hurt,
Yeah.
that caused a lot of misdirection and anger,
Mm.
a lot of sadness. And I know that just being diagnosed with breast cancer and just going through this experience many times, can induce anger and
Mm-hmm.
sadness and shock, but I want every woman out there to know you're not alone.
Mm.
You're not alone. We talk so much about race relations right now in this country. I don't care if there's someone who looks at the color of my skin and hates me simply for my existence. I'll still say to that woman, what can I do to help you? Because you do not deserve to wage this battle
Yeah.
alone. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard, but it's doable. It's doable. And even the women, because there will be some of us that won't make it, that does not mean that your memory, your spirit
Mm.
cannot still rise and thrive. And that's what Proud of the Lab is about. Our slogan is to strive, rise, and thrive. And just because you have gone on to heaven does not mean
Mm.
that somehow your struggle is not just as important or worthy as those of us who are still here.
Yeah.
So I do the best I can to uplift all women, even those
Mm-hmm.
that have gone on before.
I totally agree. I think our missions are both similar because you incorporated your mom passing on to cancer into your brand, Proud the Lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now I incorporated my mom passing on to leukemia to cancer into ToTsFrishion. So it's all the dots are all connecting together, and it's really good that we can use something that was really traumatic, something
Mm-hmm.
that was really painful, and stir up a mission, and like you said, uplift others. And it doesn't
Absolutely.
matter if they agree with us, it doesn't matter if they look like us, they don't look like us. We're just coming together as a community and helping one another, which there's so much beauty in it.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And I think that what you said is the key, and that is community.
Hmm.
We often say it takes a village to raise a child,
Hmm.
but there's a child in all of us.
Yes.
So it takes a village. We have to wrap ourselves around each other. And, especially as women, because we are the backbone of
Mm-hmm.
our culture. We are the backbone of our communities, of our society, because as women go, so goes the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important that we understand the strength and the beauty, especially in my opinion, as African American women, we hail from such beauty, from
Mm-hmm.
such grace, from such strength, from this indomitable spirit that has been passed on in our DNA for ages and ages. And we owe it to ourselves to not just lean into that, but to celebrate that. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that we're not celebrating, American culture if we're Americans, or European cultures if, we're from Europe. It simply means that we understand the inherent beauty, the inherent strength in all of us and in who we are, and that we will continue to uplift and we will continue to nurture that until our days are gone. That's it.
Wonderful. And as we're rounding up, because I literally could just sit here and listen to you. Your voice is just so subtle, and I love it. It's like I'm not sure if someone has told you before, but your voice is so subtle, and it's very intriguing just to listen to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes.
No one has ever told me that. People usually tell me to be quiet. No.
Oh no. Yes. It's like you're really soft spoken, and it makes me want to listen more. It just makes me lean in and just listen. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. That is a
Oh,
compliment that I am going to take with
good.
me. I absolutely will. I receive that. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. So as we round up, I know at some point earlier you said sexuality, like your sexuality was based on your disease status. If I can, yeah. So what changed you? I know, and as you went on your story, I realized your view changed over time. So what changed your view, and how did you cope?
Really changed my view was the matriculation of age, to
Mm,
be really honest with you. I had gotten to a point in my life where I began to understand and be able to conceptualize all of the lessons and the knowledge that my mother and the other women in my family, and including my father, who took a very active hand in raising his daughters, I was able to really put that into context. When your cycle is coming on at 9 and someone tells you, well, you're a woman now, you have to be careful, you can have a child. What 9-year-old, from back in the day, if you will, because we were not as well versed as these 9-year-olds. We didn't have social media. It was during a time where if somebody called you, you had to wait to get home to find that out. And then maybe you might call them back. It was one of that type of situation. So
you were
we
just a
didn't
kid.
have a lot of the situations that kids nowadays have with social media and things of that sort. So, it was really difficult for me to put that into context. And so, as I began to get older and I began to, matriculate through life and see many things and have many different conversations and many different experiences, negative and positive, that is what informed me
Mm,
about what it really meant to be a woman. There's a difference from being a female, a lady, and a woman, which is something that, my mother and the women in my family, because I am from the South, made sure that they instilled in me.
yeah.
And so I do believe that had I had not had such strong women guiding me,
Mm-hmm.
that my life could have been very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite possible that before I even had the opportunity to experience some of the other health challenges that I have experienced later in life. It's quite possible that I would not have even been here to see them.
Right.
So once I was able to understand the lessons that were being imparted to me, and I was able to truly appreciate them for what they were, that's when I was able to internalize them and say, these are the lessons that were given to me, the knowledge that was imparted to me to help me to be the best woman that I can possibly be. I do not only live in service of God, but I live in service to my fellow man, my fellow woman, not just myself. And
Yes.
so, because of that, there's always been a part of me that has longed and that has actively tried to reach back. I've been a mentor for kids. I call them kids. They're adults now, but I've been a mentor for youth for many years. Explaining to them my experiences, the challenges that I have had, the experiences that I have had, even outside of my health. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I was nothing to mess with when you were young. I gave my parents a run for their money. You know what I mean? My mother used to always say, you march by the beat of your own drum. And it used to terrify her. I was one of those kids where I wouldn't sneak out the house. I tell my parents, look, it's a party I want to go to. Now either you can let me go or I'm leaving. And you gotta hope I can get back in here on time. I didn't really hide too many things from my parents, and that was one of the things that absolutely scared them senseless. But I realize now that that is a part of my personality that I had to have, because I believe that I live my life now with honesty. I
Mm.
live my life now with clarity. And it is all a testament, not just to the women that came before me, but I have a sister. I have one blood sister and another sister who, is our family. So Rashida and Tiffany both, as we were raised in a way where all three of us know the power of womanhood. We know the power of grace. We
Mm.
absolutely know the power of God, and
Yeah.
we know the power of sisterhood.
Mm.
And so I think that those things, more than anything else, have been what have guided me to where I am today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. And as we round up, what are some encouraging words you would give someone, not just someone was going through breast cancer, but someone in like was being diagnosed with chronic conditions? Because I would say 1 out of 5 people in the United States now are living with some chronic condition. It could be high blood pressure, diabetes, like
Absolutely.
what you said, like lupus, fibromyalgia. So, what are some things you can tell someone? Because even cancer in itself can be a chronic condition if
And
it's lingering for a long time. So, yeah.
the thing that I would say is you are not alone. You are not alone. So many of us, including myself, feel as though we are the only ones who are having this experience. We are the only ones that understand the pain. We're the only ones that understand the isolation of chronic conditions. We are the only ones that understand how easily it is to be misunderstood. But what I would say is that there are so many of us out here that absolutely understand the challenges that you are going through, and we are here for you. One of the things that I am so dedicated to and I'm so proud of, we're proud of that, is our community, where we come together to really let our women and couples know that You are not alone. There are others who are having these same experiences as you.
Mhm.
And not only are they willing to impart their knowledge to you, but I'm almost sure that as you are able to overcome your challenges, you will have a story to impart to someone else so that they too can heal. They too can find their happily ever after. And everybody's happily ever after, if you will, doesn't look the same. You
Nope.
know, everybody's isn't a Disney story, so to speak.
I
You know, you
I
feel
just
me?
wrote something about that recently.
You know, it's not, no matter how many variations, they may try to give us. Everybody's happily ever after is not storybook, but there are definitely people out here who will hold your hand literally and figuratively, and there are people who care. There are
Hmm.
people who care. So I would say just take a chance and reach out. Reach out. There's nothing wrong with saying, I need help. There's nothing wrong with saying, I need to be understood. I need to be seen, to be valued, and to be heard.
Yeah.
Because that's what we all need. That's what we all deserve.
Yeah.
And I believe that that is truly why we were all put on this earth. We all have something to give. We all have something to enhance not just our lives, but the lives of others. So, connection, seek that connection and recognize that there are people who understand you, there are people who love you, who will support you. And
Yeah.
if need be, you can always get in touch with me and I will help you as much as I possibly can.
And where can we find you?
Or you can always reach out to me at Ebonie Michelle at prowlthelab.com. And I'll make sure I give all of this information to you so that you can post it for anyone who wants to get in touch with me. Our website is prowlthelab.com. So please visit our website, look at some of the resources that we have. If there's anything that you need that you're unable to find, just let us know. We are here for you. We are here to make sure that we make your lives easier as much as possible. And, we're a young company and there are many things that we have going on that may be behind the scenes that you may not necessarily be able to see at first glance. So always reach out, always let us know what we need, and we'll make sure we do the best that we can to provide you with everything that is required for you to strive, rise, and thrive.
Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure having you. Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate you. And I hope to everyone who listens, you got something out of this story. I was listening and it's a mixture of struggles, it's a mixture of a miracle, especially when she mentioned the doctors told her she'll never have children, and now she has beautiful children.
Yes,
So
two wonderful baby. Two wonderful babies. I do.
it's a testament that there is still a God up there. Yes,
Amen.
there is still a God up there, and He still does miracles. So,
Every day.
yeah. So, I hope you've been encouraged. And remember what you said, connection. And remember, you are not alone. In your fight with cancer, in your fight with any chronic illnesses, like no matter what it is, you are not alone. Okay?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
remember, this is You Have a Story with ToTsFrishion, where we share incredible, encouraging, faith-filled cancer stories. And I hope you've been encouraged today. Till next time, stay blessed and much love always. All right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm so honored to have been here today. Thank you. This made my day.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. With love.
And